Hi, we are doing Emerson Self-Reliance today. And so we start this piece with these, three little short quotes. And it's important when you do see those in literature that you don't skip over them. So they all basically mean "to thine own self be true." It's that same quote again, this idea of man is his own star. We have that right there in that quote. We have this Latin section, "Ne te quaesiveris extra," do not search outside yourself. This idea of everything you need to tell you how the world runs and who to be, it's all within. A lot of this, it does tie into the idea of oversoul. Let's kind of dig into the text here. And he starts off and he says, I was reading these lines and they were not conventional, they were original. Always the soul hears an admonition in such lines, let the subject be what it may. They're saying it doesn't even matter what stuff like this is about. If it's something that's original, you're going to get a lesson from it. So anything that's a new thought, any new idea, the sentiment they instill is of more value than any thought they contain. To believe your own thought, to believe that what is true for you in your private heart is true for all men, that is genius. So he's trying to tell you from the beginning, this idea is not being like a conformist, having original ideas, living truth to yourself. From the beginning of this piece, he's hitting you. And just look here at this very important line. In every work of genius, we recognize our own rejected thoughts. They come back to us with a certain alienated majesty. I'm reminded of watching these as seen on TV kind of ads. If you ever see something for some sort of invention and you think, my gosh, I had that idea. Why didn't I send that in? Why didn't I make this my, my own invention? I came up with that. That's kind of what he's talking about. He's saying all these great ideas, we see a spark of our own genius. The only difference between us and people that we recognize as geniuses are that they're the ones who went through with it. They're the ones who recognized that they had the genius in them and did something about it. For the rest of us, they're rejected thoughts. They're alienated majesty. It's the same majesty, it's the same genius in everybody, but some of us see it and some of us don't. So that's what he says. He said, great works of art have no more affecting lesson for us than this. They teach us to abide by our spontaneous impression. So again, it's this idea of it's what's in you, but it's in everybody. And the only difference between you and them is they follow through and you don't. And here is one of the most quoted lines from this whole piece. There is a time in every man's education when he arrives at the conviction that envy is ignorance, that imitation is suicide, that he must take himself for better or worse as his portion. Envy is ignorance is something that he's saying in this piece. It's very important that he has you understand that. And I think that's a lesson that a lot of us are given from one time or another. This idea of the grass is always greener on the other side, but you don't really know what their life is like ultimately. For example, I may hear this truck that rears up next to me and think, wow, that's a big truck. It's very impressive. It's clearly a truck that they worked very hard for, but I don't know what they had to do to get that truck. Maybe that truck costs a lot of money to maintain or something like that. Imitation is suicide. Maybe I really, really like Lizzo or J-Lo or whoever is popular. But if I try to be that person, I'm killing who I am. The only way to live is to be yourself. And whether that's for better or for worse, you must take yourself. And he goes on, the power which resides in him is new in nature, and none but he knows what that is which he can do, nor does he know until he has tried. So there's never been another you. And you can start to see how all these ideas that we've talked about in terms of things like oversoul, in terms of things like the kind of transcendentalist idea that we are all fundamentally divine are starting to come out here. It's new in nature, this particular experience. No one else has ever had it before. No one else will ever have it again. So I shouldn't be kind of disruptive of divinity in that way by rejecting it. Also next, I don't know what that's going to mean. I don't know what I'm accomplishing. I don't know what I'm capable of. I don't know what I can do until I try. And so don't be afraid of failure either, because all failure is finding out the limits. And even those can be pushed, because failure is just a step in, the ladder of success kind of thing. And then he goes on and he has this admonition. And remember, Emerson, has this religious background. So you do have a lot of ideas that are kind of bound up in, what you might hear in a religious sermon come through here. It says, God will not have his work made manifest by cowards. It needs a divine man to exhibit anything divine. And for God here, you substitute over soul. He's kind of using the two interchangeably. He's saying to you, if you are meant to be this instrument of God, if you're this finger of the oversoul, if you are divine, then act like it, I guess. Are you a man or not? Are you this instrument of the oversoul, or are you just this kind of whiner who is going to be too afraid to accept and enact that? Just trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string. So iron string, he's doing a couple things. One, he's setting it up like an instrument, right? Your heart is an instrument and it vibrates to that string. That's the music that you make when you trust yourself. But he's also, iron is strong. Strings are usually not made of iron. Today they're steel or they're nylon. They wouldn't have been made of iron either back in the day. So he's not just making this instrument metaphor. He's also saying it's so much stronger than that. It's something that can't be broken. It's something like a string that's not going to be snapped easily, and it's going to have this very strong resonance. Trust yourself. That's when you make your music. Don't be a coward. Don't be anybody else. Don't be who they want you to be. And so he goes on and he talks about being a child, and how when you're a child, how great that is, because you don't question it, right? When you look at kids, what do? They just go play, and they fall, and they expect to be okay. They're so sure of their dinner, and they're just as cocky as a lord. And he says that's the healthy attitude of human nature. And there's a echo here for those of you who grew up churched, of the idea of the beasts and the birds and how they just expect to be taken care of. He says, yeah, that's correct. That's the correct nature. How is a boy the master of society, independent, irresponsible, looking out from his corner? And then he says, as soon as he has once acted or spoken with eclat, he is a committed person, watched by the sympathy or the hatred of hundreds. There is no lethe for this. So saying once you've kind of given up that childlikeness and entered into this kind of world of adulthood where you're pretending and you're having to put on all these airs and wear all these hats and all these things. Lethe is the drink of forgetfulness that you drink when you pass into the netherworld. He said you can't do that anymore. Once you've lost that childlikeness state of purity and of just being who you are, it's gone. That he could pass again into his neutral, godlike independence. So he's saying that is our godlike state of the oversoul, is just being who we are without fear of judgment, just kind of expecting that we're going to be taken care of. And he says that is what self-reliance should be. And if we want to really be a man, if we want to really be wholeheartedly human in the way that we can, and embrace our godliness in the oversoul, we must be nonconformist. Because nothing is at last sacred but the integrity of our own mind, because it's our mind that plugs into the oversoul, right? Everything else is illusory. And then he goes on and he starts to kind of answer these questions, and it follows a little bit what Winthrop was doing on Arbella, where they're giving him these kind of questions. They're saying, well, what about this? And then he answers them. This is, well, what about these impulses? If I have bad impulses, what if they're impulses from below, not from above? And I replied, they do not seem to me to be such. But if I am the devil's child, I will live then from the devil. No law can be sacred to me but that of my nature. And this is something students really, really struggle with. It's hard for us to kind of think, well, he's talking about being godly, he's talking about being divine and embracing the part of ourselves that comes from oversoul. But then he's saying, if I'm to be of the devil, let me be of the devil. But you have to understand that he's not talking about the devil in the Christian sense. as this kind of opposing force. He's looking at it as being part of the oversoul. Remember, to the transcendentalist, it's all the same thing. It's all just different ways of looking at the same thing. So they look at morality as relative. You see it as evil or bad because that's your perspective, but to an oversoul that is infinite, he wouldn't necessarily see it that way. So what Emerson's saying is we should assume that these aren't actually, evil as such, that it only seems to us that way because that's our perspective, and I wouldn't have been made this way if that's not the way I was supposed to be, in other words. And he goes on and he says, truth is handsomer than the affectation of love. He's saying, I'd rather you be who you are than pretend to love me as something you're not. Because at least that way I know that you're a true reflection of the oversoul. So you can see why this was hard for some people to get their mind around, but you can also see, I hope, how this is the very beginnings of this kind of idea of American individualism as it's become today, of I am who I am, and that's fine, and that's good, and you shouldn't try to change that, of not fitting in just to fit in, and finding who you are, and finding the people you belong to, and all that kind of stuff, really has its roots here in Emerson. And then he goes on and he talks about what's our duties to each other. If our duty to ourselves is to accept who we are, I like to think of the Dolly Parton quote of figure out who you are and do it on purpose. That's a paraphrase, but it's something like that. That's the first part of this. Now we're moving on and saying, what's our duties to each other? Do not tell me, as a good man did today, of my obligation to put all poor men in good situations. And this is very different from what Winthrop was telling us. Are they my poor? I tell thee, thou foolish philanthropist, that I grudge the dollar, the dime, the cent I give to such men as do not belong to me, and to whom I do not belong. There is a class of persons to whom, by all spiritual affinity, I am bought and sold. For them I will go to prison if need be. But your miscellaneous popular charities, the education at college of fools, the building of meeting houses to the vain end to which many now stand, alms to sots, the thousandfold relief societies, though I confess with shame I sometimes succumb and give the dollar, it is a wicked dollar, which by and by I shall have the manhood to withhold. Again, this is one of those statements that you see and you think, wow, that is not what I was expecting. Because you think if a guy is making this argument that we're all divine, we're all part of God, that we should have this extreme duty to one another, right? You're thinking of something, you're expecting something a lot more like what Winthrop is saying, but he's saying, no, this is quite the opposite. What he's saying to do, okay, but why am I doing it? He's asking you to question why you are giving these charities. And if you look, he's saying, these are fools at college, so they're people who don't belong there. He's talking about alms to sots, so giving alms, which is charity money, to drunkards. Relief societies, which are vain, so basically they're projects just so people can feel better about themselves. So he is making a distinction here between people who legitimately need it and between people who don't. And he's going through and he says, I cannot consent to pay for a privilege where I have intrinsic right. What I must do is all that concerns me, not what the people think. So again, the idea here is absolutely give charity. He's saying do not give charity. He's not saying that at all. But he's saying don't give charity because it makes you look good. Don't give charity because people are telling you you're a bad person if you don't. And especially because a lot of times the things that they're asking you to do it for are bad causes. Do it because you need to, in other words. Just because somebody comes to you and say, hey, this is a good charity, give me money, I'm so sad, don't do it. Only do it if it's a cause you actually care about. And he says that the objection to this is that it scatters your force. That's the exact phrase he uses. It scatters your force. It loses your time and it blurs the impression of your character. you can't be spending time on things that you care about if you're wasting it on all these things that you don't, in other words. So don't do that. And he goes, but, we want to. He's understanding that there's pressure. Says that nonconformity, the world whips you with its displeasure. And he's kind of calling you a coward for that. He's saying if that's your worry, if you're worried that people are just going to not like you, or it's going to hurt your career or your social standing, to just not kind of fall in, well, you're a coward. It says this discontent of the multitude is more formidable than that of the Senate and the college. But he says, don't treat it like it's godlike. It's just discontent. Be a man, be a godlike man. Be the kind of person who expresses your own internal divinity and is true to what you want to do and not what they're making you do. The other terror that scares us from self-trust is our consistency, a reverence from our past act or word, because the eyes of others have no other data from computing our orbit than our past acts, and we are loath to disappoint them. So again, well, they know who I am. I don't want to change. I don't want to make them think of me differently than they've seen me in the past. They can trust me. They expect me to do this kind of thing, that kind of stuff. But why should you keep your head over your shoulder? Why drag about the monstrous corpse of your memory, lest you contradict somewhat you have stated in this or that public place? So think about how they do politicians. If a politician changes their mind or they introduce a new position that's different than one in the past, they're always just reamed. And people say, oh, they're flip-floppers. They're not consistent in their position. But that precludes any ability to grow or change. And it kind of locks you into this shell where you're constantly pretending and being someone that you're not. And Emerson's calling you out on this. He's like, so now you're contradicting who you actually are. So what if you've contradicted something you've said in the past? Who cares? A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, adored by statesmen and philosophers and divines. So a hobgoblin of little minds. It's just a boogeyman to scare weak cowards. In other words, is what he's saying. Being consistent, change from day to day. That's what growth is. If we're the same all the time, then we would still be wearing pull-up diapers and not know how to spell our own names because we'd have never grown past the age of 2. So else, if you would be a man, speak what you think today in words as hard as cannonballs, and speak tomorrow what tomorrow thinks in hard words again, though it contradict everything you say today. That's okay. Grow, change, be who you are from day to day. That's okay. It's what he's saying. No man can violate his own nature. So you can't technically contradict yourself, is what he's saying here. He talks about how isolation is important, because how can you even know who you are if you're constantly being inundated by messages? And that's, modern marketing always telling you who you should be, doesn't give you the time to really stop and think about who you want to be. I appeal from your customs. I must be myself. I cannot break myself any longer for you or you. If you can love me for what I am, we shall be the happier. If you cannot, I will still seek to deserve that you should. But I must be myself. I will not hide my tastes or aversions. I will so trust that what is deep is holy, that I will do so strongly before the sun and moon and whatever inly rejoices in me and the heart appoints. The populace think that your rejection of popular standards is a rejection of all standard. And that's very true, isn't it? Is when people see that you are not dressing in the same way everybody else dresses, or reading or watching the same things that they do, to them, to a lot of people, that feels like a personal rejection. If you don't like the same things that they like, they take it as you are rejecting them as a person, instead of that's just not your taste. And that's part of where this comes from, this pressure to fit in, because you want to be, accepted as a person. So there's a conflation of that. And he gets pretty bold in his language here. He calls it a crime. But again, just over and over, he says, don't do that. If you do that, you're doing it wrong. And then he gets on to prayer. And he has some pretty hard words for people who want to reject their own kind of divinity and their own agency here and kind of use God in this way. Prayer looks abroad and asks for some foreign addition to come through some foreign virtue, and loses itself in endless mazes of natural and supernatural, and mediatorial and miraculous. Prayer that craves a particular commodity, anything less than all good, is vicious, he says. So he says, if you are asking a deity, in this case Christian God most likely, who he's referring to, and you say, God, please give me health or money or a horse or whatever it is, he says that's vicious, and that's really strong language and not really what we're used to hearing, right? Prayer is the contemplation of the facts of life from the highest point of view. So what you should be doing in prayer is just thinking about what life is, the nature of things and our place in that. But prayer as a means to effect private end is theft and meanness. And again, that's pretty bold language. It supposes dualism and not unity. And so here's where we're starting to get his reasoning. It says, if you are appealing to God and asking God to do you favors, or treating God like a fairy godfather or something like that, saying, first of all, you're rejecting your own divinity, because you're treating God as a separate unit from you. So you're supposing dualism. As soon as the man is at one with God, he will not beg. He will not beg. He will then see prayer in all action. So basically the idea here is, once you have accepted the idea of the oversoul, and again, I'm not asking you to do that. You don't have to do this in your own daily life. This is what Emerson is saying. Once you have accepted the idea of oversoul, at that point you realize your own divinity and you realize your own kind of power in that, but you also realize the natural order of things. And it's almost fatalistic to a degree. You won't need, first of all, oh, I wish so-and-so would love me. I wish I had such and such item. Because that's all external. It's not me. And it's conformity, and it's asking for external approval when I should be asking for internal approval. So he's saying that. 2, it's cheap ends. He says it's stuff that it just isn't even worth asking for. What you should be looking at is, the beauty in all of life, instead of focusing on lack. So he says, the farmer kneeling in his field to weed it. That's prayer. Taking care of these plants and doing this stuff, whereas other people might look at it as hard labor. The rower kneeling with the stroke of his oar and using his body in this way to create motion, one with nature. All those actions, just the movements of day-to-day life, become prayer, because you are one with everything, and that oneness is prayer in and of itself. It's a very almost Zen Buddhist kind of way of looking at things. And then he goes on and say another kind of false prayers are our regrets. And again, this is almost Buddhist. Discontent is the want of self-reliance. It is the infirmity of will. Regret calamities if you can help the sufferer. If not, attend your own work, and already the evil begins to be repaired. So when you think back about, oh, I wish I had done this, I wish I hadn't done this, I wish I had this thing, I wish this thing had not happened to me, that kind of regret, again, it's ignoring all the good things that may have come out of a situation. It's ignoring the fact that you do have a limited perspective. I know that you've seen those lists. I was supposed to be on a plane, but I got in a car wreck, and then that plane ended up being the one that hit the World Trade Center or something like that. The idea being, if you regret, you're ignoring the fact that you don't have the larger viewpoint. You are part of Oversoul, but you're not all of Oversoul. So you need to trust. And regret means you're not trusting, even if it's bad stuff. So there's lessons to be learned, things of that nature. So regret and asking for things are false prayers. Don't do them if you want to be a transcendentalist. If you don't want to be a transcendentalist, it doesn't matter. So, and he goes on with that. Let's see. Again, he says, insist on yourself, never imitate. Don't be a doctor if you're going to hate it. Just because someone else enjoys being a doctor or a chemist or a mechanic, whatever it may be, you have to be what you're good at. You have to be what you enjoy. It's the only path forward in life. Your own gift you can present every moment with the cumulative force of a whole life's cultivation. But the adopted talent of another, you have only an extemporaneous half possession. So you can't be anybody else. You can only be yourself. Nobody else could have been Shakespeare, he's getting at. And finally, he tells us at the end, nothing can bring you peace but yourself. Nothing can bring you peace but the triumph of principles. So throughout this, the main idea over and over and over again is you have to accept that you are unique. You have unique talents and skills and experiences, but that's not a bad thing. And the only way that you can fully live your life, the way you're meant to live your life, the way that would most honor the oversoul / God, would be to fully recognize that and to not try to be anybody else. Trying to be other people is cowardly and it is disrespectful. That's the message that Emerson's getting at in this piece. Self-reliance to Emerson does not mean that you have to go live off grid, be, some sort of doomsday prepper. You can, if that's who you are. He would say go for it if that's who you are. But self-reliance in his sense means relying on your innate knowledge of yourself to become who you are. And anyway, so that's self-reliance. I hope that helps you understand this piece.